The chandeliers of the Aurelia Hotel's golden ballroom glowed like constellations trapped under glass, scattering light over silk gowns and tailored tuxedos. The air was warm with champagne laughter, the metallic scent of polished silver, and the faint sweetness of orchids imported for the Vale Foundation Gala. Every surface gleamed, every conversation was measured, every movement seemed choreographed to an invisible score. At the center of it all, Adrian Vale stood like a still point in a spinning galaxy. 35 years old, the heir to a dynasty older than half the buildings in Manhattan, he was a figure people orbited but never touched. His black tie was perfect, his posture unbent, his face an unreadable mask that had been perfected over years of galas, charity dinners, and carefully staged photographs. The music swelled, a lilting waltz that invited couples to the dance floor. But as always, Adrian remained at the edge. He nodded politely when women, elegant, eligible, offered their hands. He murmured excuses that sounded almost rehearsed. The whispers drifted like perfume behind him. He doesn't dance. Some said it was arrogance. Others claimed trauma. A few in hushed tones wondered if there was something wrong with him. From across the room, Veronica Vale, his mother, surveyed him with the sharp gaze of a general inspecting her troops. Clad in a gown that seemed to have been woven from moonlight, she was the kind of woman whose smile could open doors and whose silence could slam them shut forever. Her gala was a kingdom, and she ruled it with invisible strings. Adrian sipped his champagne, counting the steps of the dancers in his head. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. It was a habit he couldn't shake, a relic from a past he refused to acknowledge. His fingers twitched once against the glass, as though they longed to trace the arc of a partner's waist. He swallowed, aloud hard, turning his gaze toward the balcony. That was when the hum of the room faltered. It started with a ripple, heads turning, whispers sharpening, the crowd's attention snagged on the ballroom entrance, where the gold-trimmed doors had opened to reveal someone who did not belong in the portrait-perfect frame. A woman in a navy blue work uniform stepped onto the marble, her dark hair pulled back in a simple knot, her eyes alert but cautious. In her hand she held the smaller hand of a little girl. The girl couldn't have been more than 8, her curls gathered into 2 uneven pigtails. In her other hand, she clutched a music box, scuffed with a dent in the lid, like it was something precious enough to guard with her life. The silence was instant, as though the orchestra had missed a beat. Adrian's eyes followed theirs. The janitor moved with quiet purpose, scanning the room as though she wanted to pass through it without disturbing the delicate order of the night. But the order had already been disturbed. You could feel it in the way the whispers rose, brittle and sharp, in the way smiles turned tight at the edges. The girl's voice rose above the murmur, soft but startling in its clarity. "Mama, is this where the dancing is?" Her mother bent down slightly, murmuring something that made the girl's face fall just a little. They began to move toward the side corridor, but the crowd's eyes clung to them. It was as if marble itself had rejected the sound of their footsteps. From across the ballroom, Veronica Vale's gaze sharpened into something colder than crystal. And Adrian, against every instinct that had kept him still for years, couldn't look away. The golden doors were closing behind them when Veronica Vale's voice cut through the air like a champagne flute shattering on marble. "Security!" The single word was crisp, cold, and loud enough to make the quartet falter mid-note. Conversations stalled, laughter died in half-formed breaths. The janitor stopped. She didn't turn immediately. Her grip on her daughter's hand tightened almost imperceptibly, but she kept her chin level. Her uniform, simple navy blue, faintly creased at the elbows, seemed almost to mock the satin and jewels around her. Adrian felt the room lean toward the scene, as if curiosity were a physical force. Veronica was already crossing the ballroom, her gown whispering against the marble with every step. Her diamonds caught the chandelier's light, each flash like the blink of a warning signal. "You are not permitted in here," Veronica said, her tone measured as though she were explaining etiquette to a particularly slow child. "This is a private event." The woman turned now, meeting Veronica's eyes with a calmness that almost startled Adrian. "My shift ended 2 hours ago. My daughter left her doll in the dressing room earlier. She's been crying for it all night. I just came to get it." The girl, Naya, looked up at her mother with wide, questioning eyes, then toward Veronica. "Why is that lady yelling, Mama?" she asked, not quite whispering. Her voice carried, and a few gasps fluttered around the room. The corner of Veronica's mouth twitched, though whether in irritation or in preparation for a smile, Adrian couldn't tell. "I am not yelling," she replied, still perfectly composed. "I am maintaining the sanctity of a space that costs $50,000 a person to enter." That drew a few approving murmurs from nearby guests, as though price alone justified exclusion. Adrian's jaw tightened. The woman, Lila, as Adrian would later learn, shifted her weight slightly, angling her body so Naya was tucked just behind her hip. "We don't want to be here any longer than you want us here," she said evenly. "We'll be on our way." But before she could move, 2 security guards stepped into the doorway, blocking their exit. Adrian's pulse quickened. He knew those men. They followed orders without question, and right now their orders were clear. Veronica's gaze swept over the gathered onlookers before landing back on Lila. "The proper channels exist for staff to retrieve lost items," she said. "Walking into my ballroom in your condition is not one of them." There it was, soft enough to give her plausible deniability, sharp enough to slice through dignity. Adrian had heard her wield that tone before, but something about the way it landed now felt different. Naya's fingers curled tighter around her mother's hand. The music box in her other hand knocked gently against her leg, a muted little chime under the oppressive hush. She looked at the polished floor, then at the couples standing frozen mid-step, their eyes on her as though she'd wandered into a place where children weren't supposed to exist at all. The strings started again, too loudly, as if the conductor thought music might plaster over the scene. But the tension didn't dissolve. It thickened. Adrian found himself moving before he'd fully decided to. One step forward, then another, each one drawing curious glances. He didn't know why he was doing it, only that if he stayed still, he'd be standing on the wrong side of something he couldn't name yet. And somewhere deep down, he sensed that this was not going to end the way his mother thought it would. The quartet's waltz limped along, but no one was listening. The sound in the ballroom was no longer music. It was the drumbeat of whispers, the shuffle of expensive shoes repositioning for a better view, the soft click of cameras hidden behind jeweled clutches. Lila held her ground, her body angled protectively toward Naya. The little girl was trying to make herself smaller, the music box pressed tight to her chest. Its dented lid caught the light in dull glints, a stubborn imperfection in a room built to look flawless. Adrian's footsteps echoed more loudly than they should have on marble. Heads turned toward him, brows furrowed. What was the heir doing walking into this mess? He caught the faintest flicker of warning in Veronica's eyes, the kind she'd used since he was a boy to wordlessly remind him of the rules. Do not cause a scene, do not pick the losing side, but this time he didn't stop. "Alexander, dear," she began, her voice pitched to intercept him. "Adrian," he corrected softly without slowing down. She hated when he did that, chose the name his late father preferred. It was a small rebellion, but tonight it felt like the first note of a different score. He stopped just a few feet from Lila. Up close he saw the exhaustion tucked beneath her composure, the faint mark of cleaning supplies on her cuff, the way she kept shifting to keep her daughter between herself and the crowd's stares. The air felt tight, charged. Someone coughed in the far corner. A glass clinked against a tray. Adrian could hear the rustle of gowns behind him, the silent lean-in of 200 people waiting to see which way the air would turn. Then Naya's voice broke the tension, not loud, but cutting through every other sound. "Do any of you even know how to dance?" It wasn't a challenge. It was curiosity, pure, unpolished, and sharper for it. A few guests chuckled awkwardly, unsure if they were allowed to. Veronica's smile froze in place. Adrian felt something in him loosen, like a knot pulled free. He extended his hand toward Lila, the motion so fluid it surprised even him. "Would you give me the honor?" The silence was immediate and absolute. No crystal clinking, no fabric swishing, just the collective intake of breath from Manhattan's elite as their most sought-after bachelor invited a janitor to dance. Lila's eyes flicked to his hand, then to his face. There was no blush, no fluster, just a level, unreadable gaze. "Is this a joke?" she asked quietly. "Not even a little." His voice was steady, though his pulse was thudding in his ears. Behind him, Veronica's hand landed lightly on his arm. Her grip was polite enough for the cameras, but her fingers pressed with warning. "Adrian," she murmured, "think about what you're doing." "I am," he said, not taking his eyes off Lila. Naya tilted her head up to her mother. "Go, Mama. Show them." Something shifted in Lila's expression then. Not trust exactly, but the faintest trace of decision. She set the music box gently into Naya's hands, stepped forward, and placed her fingers in Adrian's. The orchestra seemed to sense the moment. The conductor lifted his baton, and the waltz began again, slower this time, deeper, as if the room itself was holding its breath. The first step was the hardest. Adrian felt the weight of the ballroom's gaze pressing against his back as he guided Lila onto the center of the marble floor. The lights above seemed sharper here, throwing her into focus. The clean lines of her posture, the subtle grace in the way she moved, even without music. She didn't fidget. She didn't stumble. She walked as if she had the right to be in any room she entered. When they stopped, the orchestra's opening notes spilled like honey into the charged silence. The sound filled every gilded corner, yet there was something heavier than melody holding the crowd in place. Disbelief. Lila glanced at him once, searching his face. "Why are you doing this?" she murmured. "Because I want to," he replied. And because, though he didn't say it aloud, this was the first thing in years he'd wanted to do without calculating its cost. They began to move. The moment their hands connected, something in Lila's body shifted. The precision in her step was undeniable. She wasn't following him tentatively, as so many partners did. She was meeting him, matching him, the pressure of her fingers and unspoken conversation. The ballroom's whispers started again, low and electric. People craned their necks to see better. Somewhere near the bar, a guest muttered, "Where did she learn to dance like that?" and was immediately hushed. Adrian had partnered dozens of women in rehearsals back in another life, but he hadn't felt this kind of connection in years. Lila's frame was light yet unyielding, her turns clean, her timing exact. It was as if they'd rehearsed together for months instead of meeting moments ago. Behind them, Veronica Vale stood near the dais, her face fixed in a mask of polite disinterest that fooled no one. Her eyes, however, were sharp enough to cut glass. Halfway through the piece, Lila let the music lift her into a turn that Dre sung, to an audible gasp from somewhere in the crowd. Her skirt, modest, practical, flared just enough to show the line of her legs in perfect alignment, the unmistakable mark of classical training. Adrian nearly missed his next cue, caught in the sudden realization this woman wasn't just comfortable dancing, she was extraordinary. For Lila, each step was both muscle memory and reclamation. She hadn't danced in front of strangers in 15 years, not like this. Every pivot, every rise and fall was a reminder that her body still remembered the language it had been forced to abandon. At the edge of the floor, Naya watched with wide eyes, the music box clutched to her chest. She swayed slightly, as if the melody was speaking to her too. When the song reached its final phrase, Adrian drew her in for the last slow turn, their steps aligned as though the years between their separate lives had been nothing but an intermission. The final note hung in the air, fragile and shimmering, before dissolving into silence. The applause didn't come right away. The pause was almost painful. 200 people stunned into stillness, their carefully ordered world momentarily disrupted. Then, slowly at first, the clapping began. It was hesitant, scattered, but it grew. Lila stepped back, her hand slipping from Adrian's. Her breathing was steady, her gaze calm. She turned to her daughter, who was smiling so brightly it seemed to light the shadows in the corners of the room. Adrian wanted to say something, thank you maybe, but the words caught in his throat. The moment had already shifted. The whispers were back, sharper now. Curiosity edged with something else. And Veronica Vale was no longer at the dais. She was moving toward them, her gown sweeping the floor like a storm cloud rolling in. The applause was still echoing, though it felt brittle, like glassware clinking in a room where no one dared drop their gaze. The moment the final clap faded, the whispers roared back to life, carrying half-formed questions and thinly veiled astonishment. Lila stood with her daughter now, one hand resting on Naya's shoulder, She looked untouched by the tension pressing in around her, breathing steady, back straight, eyes clear. Adrian, however, could feel the room's temperature shifting. The orchestra had stopped playing altogether. Even the waiters had frozen mid-stride, trays balanced in uncertain hands. "Where did she learn to dance like that?" a woman in a sapphire gown asked aloud, her voice carrying farther than she intended. "That's not just dancing," someone else murmured. "That's trained. Trained like the professionals." Adrian glanced at Lila, the question forming on his lips before he could stop it. "You've done this before," he said quietly. For the briefest moment, something in her expression wavered. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the same guarded composure she'd worn since stepping into the ballroom. "A long time ago," she replied. Behind him, a man cleared his throat. The sound was deliberate, the kind meant to draw attention. Adrian turned to see an older gentleman in a crisp tuxedo making his way forward. His white hair caught the chandelier's light, and there was an intent in his eyes that made the crowd lean in. Victor Ellery, renowned dance critic, the kind whose reviews could crown or crush a career in a single column. "That turn," Victor said, speaking to no one and everyone at once. "That balance, yes, I've seen that before." He looked straight at Lila. "Royal Ballet School. I would stake my reputation on it." The crowd's murmur rose into a low buzz. Adrian felt his mother's presence before he saw her. Veronica was jade, litting across the floor, her smile honed to something that could cut without leaving a mark. "Impossible," she said smoothly. "You must be mistaken, Victor. This is our janitor. She cleans rooms, not theaters." Lila didn't move, she didn't flinch, but Naya's small fingers tightened on hers. Victor shook his head, not deterred. "No, that's the technique of someone who's danced at the highest level. And there was only one dancer, one, that matched it so precisely. Elise Monroe, the prodigy who vanished after that unfortunate accident." The word accident seemed to hang heavier than the air itself. Adrian's pulse jumped. He'd heard that name before, years ago, in the hushed conversations of donors and directors. Elise Monroe had been a rising star, a story that ended abruptly, too abruptly. Lila's jaw set. She bent toward her daughter. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's get your doll and go." But as they turned, Veronica's voice, soft yet edged with iron, followed them. "Interesting. A name from the past, and a face that fits it far too well." The crowd was fully awake now, leaning forward as if they might catch the next piece of whatever this was. Adrian stood there, torn between the desire to shield Lila from the gathering storm and the undeniable pull of wanting to know exactly what his mother thought she'd just uncovered. The night had begun with a refusal to dance. Now it was spiraling into something much deeper and far more dangerous than anyone in the Golden Ballroom had bargained for. The ballroom had turned into a living echo chamber, every whisper carrying like a plucked violin string, each one bending toward the same question: who is she? Lila kept her eyes fixed on the double doors at the far end, her pace deliberate, almost regal, as if she could walk herself and Naya out of the storm gathering behind them. But storms in rooms like this never stayed behind you for long. Victor Ellery was still speaking, his voice carrying over the low hum of the crowd. The alignment in her turns, the placement of her arms, Royal Ballet School, I'm certain. And that lift through the chest. Yes, it's her style exactly. "Her style?" a man in a silver waistcoat prompted. "Elise Monroe," Victor said, his eyes narrowing on Lila. "She was the first black ballerina poised to become principal at the Metropolitan. She disappeared 15 years ago. They said she died in a car accident." A sharp gasp cut through the air. Adrian turned in time to see his mother's lips curve into the kind of smile that was never about joy. "How fascinating," Veronica murmured. "The resemblance is uncanny." Lila didn't break stride, but Adrian saw the slight stiffening in her shoulders, the way her grip on Naya's hand tightened by a fraction. Naya looked up at her. "Mama, why are they saying you're somebody else? Someone who's dead?" Her voice was small but clear enough to carry. The room quieted as if straining for the answer. Lila crouched slightly so she was eye level with her daughter. "People sometimes get confused when they see someone who reminds them of another person," she said gently. We're going to go home now. Adrian took a step toward them. Wait. He didn't know exactly why the word left his mouth, but it did. Firm, insistent. Lila turned her head just enough to look at him. Is it true? He asked quietly. Are you Elise Monroe? Her eyes, dark and steady, at his. For a moment, there was a flicker. Pain, defiance, something else he couldn't quite name. It doesn't matter who I was, she said. Only who I am now. Before he could respond, Veronica closed the distance, her perfume a sharp floral note that clung to the air. It matters very much, my dear, she said, her words wrapped in silk but lined with steel. Because if you are who they say, then there's quite a story about how you vanished, a story people might be very interested in hearing tonight. The crowd pressed in closer, like sharks scenting blood in the water. Somewhere near the back, a phone camera lifted discreetly. The orchestra, sensing the gravity of the moment, stayed silent. Lila straightened, pulling Naya gently behind her. Not tonight, she said, her voice steady. Not like this. She stepped past Veronica, but the matriarch's parting words followed her into the hall. You can't outrun the truth forever, Elise. Adrian stood rooted to the marble, his mind a storm of questions. If his mother was circling like this, then whatever truth Lila carried was dangerous, not just to her, but to anyone who got too close. And for the first time in years, Adrian knew he wasn't going to stay on the sidelines. The ballroom's noise didn't fade when Lila and Naya left. It followed them into the corridor like an unshakable shadow. Behind those gold-trimmed doors, the speculation was already mutating into something sharper, something with teeth. Adrian didn't stay to hear it. He moved through the crowd without looking at anyone, ignoring the calls of people who wanted explanations, sound bites, confirmation that the evening's most startling moment had been nothing more than a stunt. Veronica intercepted him before he reached the exit. Her smile was a mask, her eyes were pure command. You'll stay, she said softly. Leaving now will only fuel the rumors. He stopped, just long enough to meet her gaze. You've already poured gasoline on them, he said. Her fingers brushed his sleeve, deceptively light. Be careful, Adrian. Some stories are better left buried, especially when the truth isn't flattering. It was a warning, and he knew it. But instead of answering, he stepped past her and left the ballroom behind. He found them in the lobby, near the shadowed curve of the grand staircase. Lila stood with her back to the wall, speaking quietly to Naya. The little girl clutched her music box like a talisman, nodding at whatever her mother was saying. Adrian approached slowly, not wanting to spook them. You're leaving without your daughter's doll? He asked. Lila's eyes flicked to him, cool and guarded. I'll come back for it another time. Tonight's not the night. Victor Ellery doesn't make mistakes, Adrian said. If he recognized you, her jaw tightened, then maybe he should learn to keep his mouth shut. You didn't deny it, he pressed. I didn't confirm it either. She straightened, keeping Naya close. You think because you asked me to dance that I owe you something. I don't. Adrian swallowed the sting of that. You don't. But if you are who they say, and if my mother is circling you like that, she's not going to stop. The flicker in her eyes was gone too quickly to read. That's not news to me. Hours later, Adrian sat alone in his penthouse office, the city glittering far below. He poured a glass of scotch and let it sit untouched. His desk was scattered with old programs from ballet galas he'd attended as a boy, memories stirred up by Victor's words. One program lay open to a black and white photograph of a young ballerina mid-leap, suspended in air as though gravity had forgotten her. Her name, Elise Monroe, was printed beneath an elegant serif font. Adrian traced the letters with his thumb. He remembered his mother's voice from years ago, dismissive and cutting. That girl will never last. People like her never do. The comment had meant little to him then. Now, it felt like the first thread in a knot he had to untangle. He opened his laptop and typed the name into a search bar. The results were sparse, glowing reviews from 15 years ago, a few grainy performance clips, and then nothing. Just the obituary, a clipped paragraph about a tragic accident on a rainy night. It read like closure. But Adrian had grown up around the kind of people who knew how to make endings look clean when they weren't. He leaned back, staring at the photograph again. If Lila Brooks was Elise Monroe, then she'd walked away from more than just a career. She'd walked away from an entire life. And if his mother had anything to do with that disappearance, he was going to find out. And rain streaked the tall windows of Lila's apartment, blurring the city lights into soft ribbons of gold and red. The place was small, 2 rooms, a kitchen barely wide enough for 2 people to stand in at once. But it was spotless, the kind of clean that came from habit, not show. Naya sat cross-legged on the floor, the music box open beside her, its tinny melody filling the quiet. She was humming along, braiding and unbraiding the same strip of ribbon. Every now and then she'd glance at her mother, who was hunched over the kitchen table with a stack of papers and a small, battered laptop. Lila's movements were precise, like she was sorting choreography instead of documents. Newspaper clippings, receipts, Polaroids with dates scrawled in the corner. Each one was slid into a manila folder with the care of someone who knew the weight of evidence. A soft knock at the door made her pause. She checked the peephole and then unlatched the chain. Rafi stood in the hallway, shoulders hunched against the rain. He wore the maroon jacket of the Aurelia Hotel's night bellman, the fabric darkened by wet. His eyes flicked down the hall before he stepped inside. "You've been quiet lately," he said, shaking water from his cap. "That's never a good sign." Lila gave a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's been a week." "That's one way to put it. The way you looked walking into the ballroom the other night." He whistled softly. "I thought you were about to set the place on fire." "I almost did," she murmured. Before he could respond, another knock came, 3 quick raps, then 2 slow. Lila's posture eased. She opened the door to reveal Annika, a line cook from the hotel, her hair tucked under a knit cap. The smell of fresh bread clung to her. She set a paper bag on the counter and glanced at the folders on the table. "Is it time?" "Getting close," Layla said. Anika leaned and the counter. "You know if you go at her, you can't miss. Veronica Vale doesn't just push back, she destroys." "I know," Lila said quietly. "That's why I've been keeping records. 15 years worth." Rafi pulled up a chair and began flipping through a folder. Dates, payments, fake invoices, all the little threads she thought no one saw. "That's the advantage of being invisible," Lila said, slipping another document into place. "People like her do everything in front of you because they don't think you matter. I've cleaned their offices, emptied their trash, watched them leave contracts sitting open on desks. And you remembered it all," Anika said. Lila's mouth curved slightly. "Some of us can't afford to forget." Naya patted over, the music box still in her hands. "Mama, are you building a puzzle?" "In a way," Lila said, brushing her daughter's hair back from her face. "When it's done, it's going to show the truth." Rafi looked between them. "What's the next move?" Lila glanced toward the rain-slicked window, her reflection a shadow over the city lights. "I'm gonna let Veronica think she's winning, and when she's close enough to believe it, I'll pull the ground out from under her." Anika's eyes narrowed. "That's dangerous." Lila didn't look away from the glass. "So is underestimating me." The Aurelia Hotel's ballroom was a different creature in the morning. No chandeliers blazing, no hum of conversation, just pale light filtering through tall windows and the faint echo of a mop gliding over marble. Adrian stood alone near the center, listening to the emptiness. Without the music and the people, the room felt cavernous, almost lonely. He stepped forward, letting his shoes click against the floor. Out of habit, he counted in his head, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. His feet traced the ghost of a waltz he hadn't danced in years, each turn sharper than the last, each step dredging up muscle memory he thought he'd buried. He didn't hear her come in. "Your frame's too rigid," Lila's voice called from the far side of the room. Adrian turned. She was standing just inside the doorway, a plain canvas tote slung over one shoulder, wearing the same navy uniform he'd seen her in that night. Her hair was pulled back, and there was a faint sheen on her skin from the morning's work. "I thought you didn't like talking about dancing," he said. "I thought you didn't like doing it." She set the tote down and crossed the room with easy steps, not hurrying, not hesitating. Why are you here? I could ask you the same thing. I work here. She gave him a pointed look. You loiter. He almost smiled but didn't. I wanted to see the room without all the noise. Without. He hesitated. Without the eyes. Lila stopped a few feet from him. That's a privilege, she said, her voice even. To be able to choose when you're seen. Her words hit harder than he expected. He let out a slow breath. The night I stopped dancing, I was 23. Dress rehearsal for a gala performance. They were trying to impress donors. We cut corners, safety, warm-ups, everything to get more time in front of them. Partner fell during a lift, broke her neck. She lived, but it was never the same. Lila's gaze softened, but she didn't step closer. Guilt is heavy, but so is silence. He looked down at the marble. I'm not telling you this for pity. When I saw you dancing, I realized I've been moving through my life like a man carrying weights he never bothered to set down. She studied him for a moment, as if deciding whether he meant it. You're asking questions about me, she said finally. That means you're willing to carry something heavier than guilt. I want the truth, he said. If my mother had anything to do with what happened to you. She did, Lila interrupted, her voice firm. You already know it. You just don't have the proof yet. His chest tightened. Then let me help you get it. Lila's lips pressed into a faint, skeptical line. You don't get to be a savior here. If we do this, it's not your legacy we're protecting, it's the truth. And the truth doesn't care how rich your family is. Adrian met her eyes. Agreed. She tilted her head slightly, weighing him. Then we start with bait. Veronica Vale doesn't come at you head on. She sends her people. You give her something she thinks she can use against me, and we follow the trail back to her. He almost laughed. That's risky. It's the only way, she said. If you want to help, you're going to have to learn how to dance to my music now. Rain lashed the city that night, the kind of steady downpour that blurred neon signs into smears of color. In Lila's apartment, the storm outside was matched by a quiet urgency within. The kitchen table had become a war map, folders spread wide, receipts fanned like playing cards, photos stacked in careful piles. Adrian sat opposite Lila, his jacket draped over the back of his chair, sleeves rolled up. He was studying a printout of bank transactions, brow furrowed. This is the same PR firm my mother's used for years, he said, tapping the page. Crisp and long. They've handled delicate situations for her. Delicate, Lila repeated, her tone edged. That's one word for destroying people. From the living room, Naya's voice floated in. Mama, can I wind it? Lila glanced over her shoulder. Go ahead, baby. Just don't open it all the way. The music box's lullaby began to play, faint and sweet. Adrian's gaze flicked toward it. Why can't she open it all the way? Lila leaned back, folding her arms. Because it's not just a music box. It's a shell. Inside is a micro SD card. Encrypted. Everything I've gathered in the last 15 years is on it. Adrian sat up straighter. You've been carrying it around in plain sight. No one ever looks at the things they think are worthless, Lila said. They see a little girl's toy. They don't see evidence that can ruin them. She reached for a folder, sliding it across to him. Here's the plan. We leak something small, something harmless but tempting, enough for Veronica to believe she's found a weakness. She'll hand it to her crisis team, and they'll run it through Crisp and Long. That's when we start tracing calls, emails, and payments. Adrian scanned the mock document she'd created, a fabricated employment record that hinted at impropriety but couldn't actually harm her. It's bait, he said. It's a mirror, she corrected. Ted. They'll see what they want to see. Naya wandered over, still turning the music box keys slowly. Mama says you can catch bad people if you give them a string and watch where they tie it. Adrian smiled faintly. That's not wrong. Lila brushed her daughter's hair back. You're going to help too, sweetheart. At the gala next week, When the music starts, you'll be near the stage with this. She tapped the music box. When I nod, you open it all the way. That's when the file will trigger. Adrian looked between them. Trigger what? A projection, Lila said. Onto every screen in the room. Photos, audio, documents, all at once. No time for them to spin it before the truth hits. That's bold, Adrian murmured. It's necessary, she replied. I'm done letting her tell my story for me. Outside, thunder rolled across the city, low and steady. Adrian glanced toward the rain-smeared window, then back at Lila. There was no hesitation in her eyes, no fear, only the precision of someone who had been rehearsing this moment for half her life. And for the first time since agreeing to help, he realized this wasn't just a dance with his mother. This was a performance designed to bring the whole house down. 2 nights later, the Aurelia's East dining room was glowing under softer lights, the kind reserved for intimate donor dinners. Only 30 guests, but each one worth more than a midtown high-rise. Waiters moved like clockwork, pouring wine into crystal, the clink of silver on china forming a steady undercurrent to the low hum of conversation. Adrian sat at the far end of the table, posture easy, expression neutral. Lila's document was already in play, slipped quietly into the hands of a chatty event planner who owed Veronica too many favors. All they had to do was wait. Rafi was working valet tonight, his phone in his pocket set to vibrate when the first digital breadcrumbs appeared. Annika was in the kitchen, carrying a tray but listening for key words with the sharp ear of someone who'd grown up eavesdropping on secrets. Veronica was at her brightest, laughter just a touch louder than necessary, diamonds catching the light with every tilt of her head. Adrian watched her as one might watch a chess opponent study the board. She hadn't seen him and Lila together since the ballroom, but he could tell she was looking for an opening. It came sooner than expected. The event planner leaned in to whisper something in Veronica's ear. A delicate hand rose to her pearls, her brows arching just so. The look was pure theater. "Oh?" she said lightly, as though surprised but not troubled. Adrian's phone buzzed once under the table, Rafi's signal. The planner had taken the bait. Veronica's smile deepened, but her voice lowered. No, let's not discuss it here. Send it to Crispin Long first thing in the morning." Adrian kept his eyes on his plate, though his pulse quickened. She was moving exactly as Lila predicted, information to the crisis firm, the same one that had handled so many of her delicate problems. In the kitchen, Anika caught the words as Veronica passed B. I'd agreed another guest. She ducked into the hallway, thumbed out a text. Target engaged, sending trail now. By the time dessert was served, Rafi had already tracked the initial upload, metadata pinging from the planner's phone to a secured email at Crispin Long. From there, the firm's servers lit up with activity, cross-referencing names and combing public records. Adrian excused himself early, ignoring the flicker of suspicion in his mother's eyes. Outside, the rain had started again, soaking the valet stand. Rafi handed him a folded piece of paper along with his car keys. She's in it, Rafi said under his breath. Direct line to the senior partner. Payments routed from the Vail Foundation's discretionary account. Adrian slipped into the driver's seat, glancing at the glowing tower of the Aurelia in his rearview mirror. The first move had been made. Back in her apartment, Lila was already setting up the next step, the music box on the table beside her. Naya sat nearby, sketching a picture of the ballroom with tiny stick figures on the marble floor. They took it? She asked without looking up. They took it, Lila confirmed. And now, we watch where they tie the string. The storm outside deepened, wind rattling the window panes. In the silence between gusts, there was only the soft tick of the music box key turning and the knowledge that Veronica Vail had just stepped onto a floor she didn't know how to dance. The rain hadn't stopped by the next evening. It slicked the streets in silver, beating on the hoods of cabs and pooling in the gutters as if the city itself were bracing for something. Adrian arrived at Lila's apartment without an umbrella, his hair damp, coat collar turned up. She let him in without a word, stepping aside so he could pass into the cramped warmth of the kitchen. The table was already set up like a command center, laptops open, papers spread, the soft glow of a desk lamp throwing long shadows across the walls. Two other people were there. David Cho, a civil rights attorney with wire-rimmed glasses and a voice that carried in a courtroom, sat with his hands folded over a legal pad. Across from him, Marisol Vega, an investigative journalist for the Ledger, was scrolling through a series of encrypted files on her screen, her dark hair falling forward as she leaned in. "This is everything we pulled from Crispin Long in the last 24 hours, Marisol said, gesturing at her laptop. "Your bait worked. They ran a full background scrub on you, Lila, financials, addresses, employment history, and they sent their findings straight to an unmarked server. Guess who else had access to it?" "Veronica Vale," Adrian said without hesitation. Marisol gave him a dry smile. She didn't even bother to hide the login trail. David slid a printed sheet toward Lila. "The financial records Rafi traced? They connect the Vale Foundation's discretionary account to payouts for at least 7 image management campaigns over the last 2 decades, all targeting women of color in the arts." Lila didn't flinch. She'd expected this. Still, her fingers tightened slightly around the pen in her hand. "That's our pattern," she said. "It's not just me." Adrian leaned forward. "If we show this to the public—" "We can't yet," David interrupted. "Not without airtight corroboration. Veronica's team will scream defamation, and they've got the resources to drag it through the courts for years. So we build something they can't bury," Marisol said. "Documents, recordings, eyewitness accounts, and we drop it all at once." Lila's gaze shifted to the music box on the table. It sat there innocently, its chipped paint catching the lamplight. "That's what the gala is for," she said. "Every guest will have a phone out. Every outlet will be watching. We time it right, and they'll see it live before Veronica can cut the feed." Adrian frowned. "You're sure Naya should be involved in this?" "She's part of it whether I like it or not," Lila said, her voice steady. "She's the reason I've been collecting all of this. I'm not raising her to hide." The room was quiet for a moment, the rain tapping at the window like an impatient metronome. Marisol closed her laptop. "We've got 5 days. I'll line up the publication schedule. David, you work on the legal framing. Adrian, keep your mother talking. Make her think she's close to cornering Lila. That'll keep her guard down." Adrian nodded, though he didn't miss the look Lila gave him. A warning wrapped in trust. As the meeting broke up, he lingered by the door, watching Lila wind the music box key. The soft, familiar melody filled the small room. "When the time comes," he said quietly, "are you ready for what happens next?" She looked up at him, her eyes unwavering. "I've been ready for 15 years. I just needed the right stage." Outside, the rain kept falling, steady and relentless, as if it understood there were some storms you didn't run from, you met them head on. The night of the gala arrived dressed in silver and glass. The Aurelia's golden ballroom had been transformed yet again, orchids spilling over crystal vases, champagne catching the light like molten gold, and an orchestra tuning softly beneath the grand archway. It was the Vale Foundation's crown jewel event of the year. Every table gleamed, every seat was filled with the kind of faces that could change policy over dessert. Cameras from society pages and streaming platforms glided through the room, capturing the perfection Veronica Vale had spent months orchestrating. Adrian stood near the edge of the floor, wearing the same mask of calm he'd worn at every gala before this. But tonight it wasn't a shield. It was part of the plan. He could feel the music box in the inner pocket of his jacket, its weight small but decisive. Naya would have it soon. Lila arrived quietly, her navy gown moving like liquid shadow through the crowd. It wasn't flashy, but it fit her perfectly, the kind of elegance that didn't have to ask for attention. She kept her eyes forward, chin high, even as whispers rose in her wake. Some guests remembered her from that first dance, others knew only the rumors. Veronica spotted her almost instantly. Her expression didn't change, but Adrian saw the flicker, recognition tinged with satisfaction. She believed she was about to finish what she'd started 15 years ago. The orchestra shifted into a slow, lush waltz. That was his cue. Adrian moved through the crowd until he was standing in front of Lila. "May I?" he asked, offering his hand. A ripple of surprise passed through the room. 2 dances in the same season was already gossip-worthy. 2 with the same woman was practically scandal. Lila hesitated for a heartbeat, then placed her hand in his. Let's give them something to talk about. They stepped onto the marble floor. The cameras pivoted. The music swelled. And as they began to move, Adrian's free hand brushed the small of her back, not just to guide her, but to slip the music box into her palm. She closed her fingers around it without missing a step. Across the room, Naya was waiting near the stage, dressed simply, a ribbon in her hair. At the far end of the ballroom, Rafi and Anika stood by the AV control booth, their staff badges granting them silent authority. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. The waltz carried them closer to the center. Veronica watched from her table, sipping her champagne as though this were nothing more than theater for her amusement. But the downbeat was coming. As they spun, Lila's eyes met Naya's across the floor. A small nod. Naya turned the key on the music box, winding it until it clicked. Then she opened it fully. The lullaby spilled into the air, strangely clear over the orchestra. A second later, the ballroom's massive projection screens flickered, cutting from decorative patterns to a cascade of images, bank statements, email chains, photos of meetings behind closed doors. Veronica Vale's voice filled the space, crisp and unmistakable. Certain doors stay shut for certain people. Gasps broke out like gunfire. The waltz faltered as couples stopped mid-step to stare. The orchestra trailed off, confusion spreading through the musicians. Adrian tightened his hold on Lila's hand. And they kept moving, 2 dancers in the middle of an unraveling empire. Veronica rose from her seat, her face draining of color. "Turn that off," she barked toward the AV booth. But Rafi had locked the system, and Anika was already streaming the feed to every major news outlet's social accounts. On screen, more documents appeared, payout records, forged press releases, internal memos with her signature. Each one hammered another nail into the coffin she hadn't even realized she was building for herself. The room had gone utterly still except for the soft mechanical music of the box, playing on as if it were the true conductor of the night. And in that moment, everyone knew. The dance wasn't the performance. This was the silence after the final image faded, was heavier than any note the orchestra had ever played. For a long heartbeat, no one moved. Then the murmurs began, sharp, urgent, breaking the stillness like splintering glass. Guests turned to one another, voices rising in disbelief and recognition. A few already had their phones out, recording, broadcasting to whoever would listen. Veronica Vale stood in the center of it all, the perfect posture she'd honed over decades now looking brittle, almost fragile. Her hand was still raised from the command she'd barked seconds earlier, but no one was moving to obey. The AV booth was locked, her control had slipped, and everyone could feel it. Adrian stopped dancing. He and Lila stepped back from each other, though neither of them left the center of the floor. Lila's chin was high, her breathing steady. Naya was at the edge of the marble now, watching with the wide, still eyes of someone who understands something is ending. One of the museum directors rose from his table, his voice carrying. "Is that your voice, Veronica?" She didn't answer. Another guest, a woman in a jade gown, spoke next, her words edged with outrage. "You said the photos of Maya Torres were real. You ruined her career." The names began to spread through the room. Dancers, singers, painters, each one tied to a story the screens had just revealed, and each one, it seemed, connected to Veronica's long, calculated campaigns. Veronica's gaze darted toward her son. "Adrian, tell them this is a fabrication." He didn't move. "Is it?" Her jaw tightened. "I did what was necessary to protect the Vale Foundation. To protect you." "From who?" His voice carried farther than he expected. "From women who worked harder than anyone in this room to earn their place? From talent you couldn't control?" A hush fell again, heavier than before. The cameras were no longer on Lila. They'd turned to Adrian and his mother, the family's fracture playing out in real time. Veronica tried to smile, the kind that had charmed senators and CEOs. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," he cut in. "You built your power by closing doors. Tonight, every one of them swings open." A ripple of applause began near the back. It was hesitant at first, but it grew, spreading like a rising tide. Not everyone joined in, but enough did to shift the energy of the room. Veronica's eyes moved from face to face, calculating, but the certainty was gone. The room was no longer hers. Lila stepped forward, her voice calm, almost gentle. For years, you decided who deserved to be seen. Tonight you don't get that choice anymore. The words landed with finality. Veronica's lips parted as if to reply, but nothing came. She turned sharply and walked out of the ballroom, the train of her gown whispering against the marble like a retreat. Adrian stood watching until the doors closed behind her. Then he looked at Lila, the faintest trace of relief in his eyes. It's done. No, she said quietly, shaking her head. It's only begun. Around them, guests were still talking, the air thick with scandal and revelation. Phones were buzzing, news alerts lighting up screens. The ballroom was no longer the Vale Foundation's showcase. It had become the scene of its undoing. And Lila knew, as she reached for Naya's hand, that the real work would happen outside these golden walls. 6 months later, the Aurelia's Golden Ballroom was a ghost of its former self. The chandelier still glittered, the marble still gleamed, but the energy was different, calmer, stripped of the sharp-edged exclusivity that once defined it. The Vale Foundation's name was gone from the banners. The new ones read simply, The Porchlight School of Dance, Winter Showcase. In a converted warehouse on the Lower East Side, the real work had been happening for months. Lila stood backstage, her navy dress traded for a simple wrap skirt and soft ballet flats. The air smelled faintly of rosin and fresh paint. Through the heavy black curtains, she could hear the low chatter of parents and neighbors filling folding chairs, the hum of community instead of the stiff murmur of high society. Naya was in the front row of her class, her hair tied with the same ribbon she'd worn at the gala. She bounced on her toes, eyes bright, waiting for the music to start. Around her were children of every shade and background, sons of single mothers, daughters of immigrants, kids from uptown brownstones and downtown shelters. All of them wearing the same soft leather slippers, all of them ready to take the stage. Adrian was there too, leaning against the wall with his sleeves rolled up, his tie abandoned somewhere. He'd been helping set up chairs an hour earlier, smiling awkwardly when a few parents recognized him from the news. He'd gotten used to it, the odd mix of curiosity and gratitude that followed him now. The music began, a light, steady melody. Naya and her classmates moved as one, each step deliberate, each turn full of the kind of joy no critic could quantify. Lila watched from the wings, her heart rising with every beat. This was the antidote to every locked door, every whispered dismissal, every calculated smear. When the performance ended, the applause wasn't polite, it was loud, messy, wholehearted. Naya grinned from ear to ear, running to Lila the moment she stepped off stage. "We nailed it," she beamed. "You did more than that," Lila said, pulling her into a hug. "You showed them what the future looks like." After the show, people lingered, shaking hands, signing up for classes, donating what they could. The Porchlight School was already planning branches in 2 more boroughs, funded partly by public donations and partly by Adrian, who had redirected a significant portion of what used to be the Vale Foundation's annual budget. Later that evening, Lila found him standing near the stage, watching the kids run back and forth with the unself-conscious energy of people who didn't know they were making history. "You've done something here," he said. "We've done something," she corrected. He glanced at her, a faint smile touching his lips. "I'm not sure my name helps much these days." "It's not about your name," she said. "It's about what you choose to attach it to." From across the room, Naya called to them, "Mama, Adrian, come dance." Lila hesitated, but Adrian was already stepping forward. "You know," he said, offering his hand, "I think I've finally learned how to say yes." She took it. Together, they stepped onto the floor, not under chandeliers and watchful eyes, but in the soft, forgiving light of a space built for everyone. And as the music started, Lila realized this dance wasn't about defiance anymore. It was about possibility. Snow fell in slow spirals outside the warehouse windows, muting the city's noise to a faint hush. The Porchlight School's winter showcase had ended hours ago, but Lila was still in the studio, sweeping the marley floor in slow, steady arcs. The smell of pine from the lobby's little Christmas tree drifted in, mingling with the faint tang of resin from the dancers' shoes. Adrian appeared in the doorway, coat unbuttoned, a slim portfolio tucked under his arm. He looked different now, less polished, more at ease, but his eyes carried a seriousness that told her this wasn't just a social visit. "I went through my father's old archives," he said, stepping inside. "Business records, correspondence, things my mother didn't know I still had." Lila leaned on the broom handle. "And?" He set the portfolio on the piano bench and opened it. Inside was a weathered envelope, its edges softened by time. Across the front, in elegant handwriting, was a name Lila hadn't heard spoken in years. Elise Monroe. Her breath caught. It was buried in a box marked scholarship. "Confidential," Adrian continued. 15 years ago, someone anonymously funded a full legal defense for you, enough to challenge the Metropolitan's termination, to fight back against the false stories. The money was wired, but the case never moved forward." She stared at him. "Because the day I was supposed to meet my lawyer, the obituary came out. The world thought I was dead." Adrian nodded slowly. "The anonymous donor was me." The words landed with a weight she hadn't expected. "You?" "I was 20. My father had just died. I didn't have much control, but I knew what my mother was doing wasn't right. I sent the money through a trust so she couldn't block it." He exhaled, eyes lowering. "She found out anyway. She didn't just ruin your career. She made sure we never crossed paths." Lila's fingers brushed the envelope, tracing her old name as if it might dissolve under her touch. "All this time, I thought no one tried to help." "I tried," Adrian said quietly. "I failed. But maybe this—" He gestured toward the school, toward the muffled sound of children's laughter still echoing faintly from the hallway. "Maybe this is how we both get it right." For a long moment she didn't speak. The past was a weight she'd carried alone for so long that sharing it felt almost disorienting. But when she looked at him now, she didn't see the heir to the Vale name. She saw the man who had reached for her once before, across a chasm built by his mother, and who was standing here again, no chasm between them this time. From the lobby, Naya's voice rang out. "Mama! Adrian! The snow's sticking! Come see!" Lila smiled faintly, tucking the envelope under her arm. "We're coming." They stepped into the cold together, the snow soft beneath their feet. Out on the street, the city glowed under a thin white blanket, quiet and new. Naya spun in the snow, laughing, her arms wide, and for a moment the world was only light and air and breath. Lila glanced at Adrian, her voice low. 15 years ago I was erased. Tonight I feel like I finally stepped back into the light." "And you're not stepping out again," he said. The snow kept falling, steady and sure, covering every footprint until the street was clean again, ready for whatever came next.